On October 29, 2018, a nearly new Boeing 737 MAX 8 took off from Jakarta, Indonesia. 13 minutes later, it was in the Java Sea. All 189 people on board were dead. The plane had nosedived into the water at 400 miles per hour, while the pilots fought desperately against a system they did not know existed. 5 months later, on March 10, 2019, the same model aircraft took off from Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. 6 minutes after takeoff, it crashed into a field, killing all 157 people on board. The same system, the same failure, the same result. 346 people dead, 2 crashes 5 months apart. The same software on the same aircraft, dragging both planes nose first into the ground. And Boeing knew. Internal documents would later reveal that the company's own employees had identified the problem years before, either crash, and chose to hide it from the pilots, the airlines, and the regulators who were supposed to keep the flying public safe. The system that killed them was called the Maneuvering Characteristics Augmentation System. Inside Boeing, they called it MCAS. It was a piece of flight control software that most pilots had never heard of, because Boeing deliberately kept it out of the flight manual. Here is why it existed. Boeing's 737 had been flying since 1967. Over 5 decades, the company kept updating the airframe rather than designing a new one, because a new aircraft would cost tens of billions of dollars and take years to certify. When Boeing needed to compete with the Airbus A320neo, they chose to strap larger, more fuel-efficient engines onto the existing 737 frame, but the new engines were physically bigger than the old ones. They would not fit in the same position under the wing, so Boeing moved them forward and higher, which changed the way the aircraft behaved in flight. Specifically, the new engine placement caused the nose to pitch upward at high angles of attack, creating a tendency that did not exist on previous 737 models. Rather than redesign the aircraft, Boeing wrote software to compensate. MCAS would automatically push the nose down when sensors detected the aircraft was pitching too high. The system was connected to a single angle of attack sensor on the outside of the aircraft. One sensor, no backup. If that sensor sent incorrect data, MCAS would respond to a problem that did not exist and force the nose of the aircraft toward the ground. Boeing's reasoning for this design was not safety, it was money. If the 737 MAX was classified as a new aircraft type, every airline that bought it would need to send their pilots through expensive simulator training. Boeing's biggest selling point to airlines was that pilots already certified on the older 737 could switch to the MAX with nothing more than a brief computer-based course. Adding MCAS to the flight manual would draw attention to the differences between the two aircraft. Attention would lead to questions. Questions would lead to simulator requirements. Simulator requirements would cost airlines money and cost Boeing sales, so they left it out. Pilots flying the 737 MAX did not know MCAS existed. The internal documents that emerged after the crashes painted a picture that was worse than negligence. In 2016, 2 years before the first crash, Boeing's chief technical pilot Mark Faulkner tested MCAS in a flight simulator. In instant messages to a colleague, he described the system as running rampant. He wrote that he had basically lied to the regulators, unknowingly. In a separate message, another employee described crashing the aircraft the first few times he flew it in the simulator. "You get decent at it after 3 or 4 tries," he wrote, "but the first few are ugly." In 2017, a Boeing employee recommended describing MCAS as an addition to an existing system rather than a new feature. The internal memo was explicit about why. If we emphasize MCAS is a new function, there may be greater certification and training impact. The language was careful, the intent was not. They were engineering the paperwork to avoid scrutiny. In 2018, after the Lion Air crash had already killed 189 people, a Boeing employee wrote in an internal message that he still had not been forgiven by God for the covering up he had done the previous year. Another employee, when asked whether they would put their family on a 737 MAX, said they would not. A colleague agreed. One email, released during the congressional investigation, contained a single sentence that became the defining quote of the entire scandal. "This airplane is designed by clowns, who in turn are supervised by monkeys." Boeing's response after the first crash was not to ground the fleet. It was to issue a bulletin reminding pilots of existing procedures for handling a runaway stabilizer, a procedure designed for a mechanical failure, not for a software system actively fighting the pilot for control of the aircraft. The 737 MAX continued flying. 5 months later, Ethiopian Airlines Flight 302 went down under nearly identical circumstances. Only then, after 346 deaths, did aviation authorities worldwide ground the aircraft. The grounding lasted 21 months. During the investigations that followed, the scale of what Boeing had concealed became impossible to contain. Congressional hearings produced 117 pages of internal messages in which employees discussed misleading regulators, complained about the company's safety culture, mocked senior management, and expressed private horror at what they had been part of. The Federal Aviation Administration's own role came under scrutiny. The agency had delegated significant portions of the 737 MAX's certification process to Boeing itself, allowing the company to essentially assess the safety of its own aircraft. The system was called Organization Designation Authorization. It was designed to streamline the certification process. In practice, it meant the company that built the plane was also the company that approved the plane. Boeing's chief executive, Dennis Muilenburg, was fired in December 2019 after months of defending the aircraft, alienating regulators, and mishandling the response so thoroughly that even Boeing's own board lost confidence in him. The company eventually paid over $2.5 billion in fines and settlements. A deferred prosecution agreement with the Department of Justice charged Boeing with conspiracy to defraud the United States. In 2024, the 737 MAX returned to the news when an Alaska Airlines flight experienced a door plug blowout mid-flight, tearing a hole in the side of the fuselage at 16,000 feet. No one died, but the incident reignited scrutiny of Boeing's manufacturing quality and corporate culture. Federal investigators found that Boeing could not produce the paperwork documenting who had worked on the door plug or whether the bolts securing it had been properly installed. 346 people are dead because a corporation decided that the cost of transparency was higher than the cost of silence. The software that killed them was not a mystery. It was not an unforeseeable failure. It was a known problem, documented internally, tested in simulators, discussed in emails, and deliberately hidden from the people who needed to know about it most. The pilots sitting in the cockpit. The internal emails survive. The congressional testimony is public record. The names of the dead are documented. Boeing knew the system was flawed. Boeing knew the pilots did not know it existed. Boeing chose to say nothing. And then, after 189 people died, Boeing chose to say nothing again. If you found this important, subscribe to the Midnight Vault. We open the files governments and corporations spent millions trying to keep sealed. New videos every week.